All right, Practice Indie Fam Jam. We have just an incredible member who I absolutely adore today on the podcast, Everly Coleman. Everly, thank you so much for being here. And this week we are talking about Shakti, which is divine feminine and creative energy. And I thought there was no one better to talk about this than Everly, as she is both divine feminine and creative. So Everly, would you share a little bit about yourself and who you are?
Yeah, thanks for having me. So I've been a member for Practice Indie about 2 years. And Practice Indie actually played a really important role in my gender journey. I came to Naptown for Swift, but ended up staying for the yoga. And some of the things that I experienced was the asana practice really helped me kind of inhabit and embrace my body in a way I hadn't before. And then there's the yogic philosophy, with kind of like that embracing enoughness and mindfulness was a really good experience. And it's kind of special to me in that it was the first place I felt where I was able to be in community with other women as a woman. So that's kind of my connection to Practice Indie. I live here with my wife. We've been in Indy for about 7 years. By day, I help businesses incorporate data science and analytics into their processes. And by night, I'm kind of a maker, so I work in a bunch of different mediums and make a lot of different kind of crafty things, kind of try to keep them a little cute and whimsical, playful. So that's a little bit about me.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here. And you also have a pug that one of the only reasons I wanted to stay on Instagram was to watch your pictures of your dog. So can you tell us about your dog?
Yeah. So Fresca the pug, she's about 12 years old. You can actually, over my shoulder, you can see we've got a big printed picture of her. So we adore her. She's settled into old age and is kind of a grumpy pug now, but we love her.
So cute, Fresca. So we are talking about this concept of Shakti and Shiva. Last week we were doing a whole week on Shiva, which is often seen as, he's seen as the primordial yogi. He's seen as a masculine energy, and he's seen as the destructive element. So his complement is Shakti, the creative element, the feminine element. What's interesting about them, I think one of the things that's always drawn me to Indian philosophy, particularly Hindu philosophy and religion, is that it's on a broad spectrum. Like there are images of Shiva where he is both masculine and feminine. And so I wanted to have you on here today to talk about what it means to claim your femininity and what it means to be in a spectrum. And so I'd love for you to share, like, for you, what does it mean to be a woman? What does it mean to be female? Do you think those words interchange? That kind of thing.
Yeah. So kind of first and foremost, just because of the way I kind of came to embrace my womanhood, to say I'm a woman for me has a lot of kind of like this idea of a commitment to authenticity. Being a woman or female is, to be at home in peace with myself. And that's probably different that may not be something, a lot of cisgendered women experience, just because of how they kind of came into their womanhood. It was kind of the default assumption. So at least for me in my kind of gender experience, there's kind of like that extra layer, when I talk about being a woman or female, and I use those terms interchangeably. And for me, it kind of denotes how I move through the world and experience and relate to the world around me. So there's internal component of being a woman, and then there's this kind of more kind of social component where I feel like it's having a shared sense of identity and/or experiences with other women as it relates to gender. And some people will say, well, a cisgendered woman's experience is different from a trans woman's experience, and that's absolutely true. And I think if you can always carve things out to a point, where you ultimately end up with a subset of just one, right? Because you were born, or from the South, so that's a different experience for you as a woman than someone born on the West Coast. So like you can always keep slicing that, ad nauseum until you just get to a group of one. So I think so. It's really kind of what is to be a woman is very contextual, and it differs across time and place. But for me, I think of it as kind of there are gendered experiences, even though it's a social construct. There are gendered experiences are real, and but and then I share some of those experiences with other people who identify as female. So that's kind of what that means to me. And I'm sure people experience it differently from different backgrounds and cultures. But
just watched the video that you shared with me from Jackson Bird about how to speak to transgendered people. And I think one of the things that he shared that I thought was so important, even though I just watched this 5 minutes before our conversation and I've been thinking about it, is that we just have to have these conversations. So I want to say up front, I apologize if I say something super stupid. It wouldn't be uncommon for me, as you know, you've taken my classes. So, but do you think there are things about cisgender, the experience of a cisgender woman that they take for granted, that being transgender female is different, or do you think probably not? What do you think or feel about that?
Yeah, I think, it's something people experience with a lot of identities, but, I don't know if there's like a cisgendered woman necessarily experiences the kind of doubt or the feeling like that she has to prove to others that she's a woman. It's kind of, you kind of get a default into it in a way that, a trans woman wouldn't. So in that way, that's different. And to just not, I think there probably are some things that, a cis woman kind of gets to take for granted because it's already the default, right? It's already there versus, the fight that some transgender women have to go through to be recognized as a woman. And, on the flip side, there's also things that, are unique to cisgender women. While not all cisgendered women have uteruses or periods or hormone cycles, those are experiences that some transgender women don't have or can't have. So there are differences, but I think the great thing about, at least contemporary feminism is that it's very intersectional, just like a Black woman has a very different set of experiences than, a white woman. They can both be women, and those other factors intersect in a way that make them different, but there still is a common and shared identity among them.
Yeah, I'm watching my children and working very hard to not socially normalize gender in my home. And, if my son wants to wear heels, not categorizing that anything, right? He just wants to wear heels. But there is, in my experience, and I am all the things, cisgender, heteronormative, so I'm certain a lot of my conditioning plays into this. But do you feel like, as claiming your womanhood as being a woman, do you feel that there are things that you enjoy now more as you embody your womanhood than when you were embodying as a man? Like, or does that even make sense? Did I say that right? Do you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
things that you feel are feminine that you love claiming as a woman?
Yeah, so I think so I just enjoy life more. So that was a win. But yeah, there's also like components of, what does it mean to be a woman that unfortunately for society, are very kind of off limits. There's this whole culture of toxic masculinity, and I was really steeped in that. I went to Catholic school for 12 years, 4 of which were at an all boys school. So there was a lot of, kind of, hetero, a lot of homophobia, a lot of cis normativity around that. So they're kind of being conditioned that, certain things aren't for you. You can't, if you do that, like, I don't know what would happen if I had done certain things, but like something bad would happen. So yeah, being able to tap into things kind of without all that baggage that are considered more feminine. I've really enjoyed, just being able, that women have a lot more choices, in clothes, like being able to be expressive through dress or makeup or jewelry, which is, a man can do that. It's perfect. It should be normalized, but it's a lot harder to move through the world and interact with people kind of in a frictionless way if you're not presenting as a woman and you're doing some of those things. So being able to do that without all that kind of friction or resistance has like kind of opened up new things for me and new experiences and kind of avenues just to like express myself.
I think you just hit on something really beautiful about dharma, and that, like, you used the word choice a few times about what it means to be a woman is to open up your choices. And I think that's starkly contrasted with, that this wasn't necessarily, yes, it was a choice for you and it wasn't a choice for you. Like, this is who you are. And in order to become more fully that, you have to continue to choose it, right? And I think that's what, and you said several times, frictionless versus friction. To move into our dharma is to move into a space that karmically we are less frictionless, but often the road to that is rife with friction, and I think, and it's that conscious choice. And I think what's powerful about this 2 weeks of programming is Shiva and Shakti. When we talk about Shiva, we talk about destruction, but it's not destruction. The analogy I was using is Heath Ledger in the final Batman movie he was in. He like lights the fucking thing of money on fire, and he said, I just want to watch the world burn. Well, that's not Shiva energy. Shiva energy is conscious destruction in order to rebuild, and Shakti energy is not just like throwing paint on a canvas. I mean, that also could be seen as creation, but it's conscious creation. It's conscious choice of femininity. And so I think that's really beautiful about how you are both, your dharma in the world is to be a woman, and you are actively choosing it. And something I've taken away from just prepping for this conversation and thinking about this conversation and thinking about how I can be a better ally to trans people is, I got to walk into this, and I do take that for granted. And I love being a woman. I love embodying that. And I want to choose that more, instead of just like it acts, that's not dharma. That's me being passive. So I love how you illuminated choice. I'm reading through my list. I guess in terms of the conversation around trans and cisgender, are there things that you wish that more cisgender people knew about the conversation, and you wish we would either come to the table a little bit more prepared with, or start to consider? I know that's a very large question, but in your experience, are maybe like top of mind things?
Yeah, so there's a couple. I think the first one is, how much language matters in these sorts of discussions in making the world, a safe and inclusive place for trans people. Let's see, I actually wrote something down. I'm just gonna find it. Yeah, because, and I can be sometimes I'm actually a jerk about it, about, the language we use, because I think, even in my own journey, and I transitioned later in life. I was in my my 30s, and one reason for that was growing up in a Catholic conservative household and 12 years of Catholic school. And in that, I just never had this conceptual framework or even the words to express my own identity. So there was no chance I could at that, until I had that I could even engage in conversations with other people about what does it mean to be this or have this identity or this experience in place. And so I think for cis folks to kind of be aware of that, think about the language they're using, who does that include, who does that exclude? Are we defaulting to a cis normative talking where, we say, in hospitals are bad at this. Even my health system, the largest in the state, they'll say something like women's health, and it will be, what that really means is this is where the OB-GYNs are in the system, and but there's trans men who have uteruses and need OBs, things like that. So how we frame it, where we say women and we mean to be inclusive, but then we also use it in ways where it's really a very cis normative kind of default, and which is always kind of disappointing to think as a trans woman, like, oh, this is for women, I can be part of this, and then find out, oh no, not really. So I just thinking, and no one's perfect, and there's so much inertia, but to have that in mind, how are we using our language? Another thing for kind of cis folks to think about, people try, really well-intentioned folks who try to be allies can actually make it more difficult and kind of othering for trans folks in some situations. So, I was on a women's panel speaking about my art, and I was the only one at the end of that panel that a reporter there asked pronouns for. And that's kind of, I understand why she did it, but if you only ask for pronouns when you're looking at someone who you think is trans, one, that can be really dysphoric. It's kind of calling them out like, hey, you don't pass, but I don't know what to call you. Like, what are you? And if you're not asking cis people that, that's a problem. And so kind of having those conversations. If you're only doing that when there's a trans person there, and you're not doing it with your cis friends, that's something to think about. And then the last one I had is just being really cognitive of where you're kind of getting your information or narratives about what the transgender or non-binary experience is, because a lot of that stuff out there is produced and made for, is produced it's produced by cis folks for the consumption of cis folks, and there's this real obsession out there with basically just the physical transition of what a trans identity is. A lot of the stuff you'll see is, and it's really problematic, will be just about the physical transition and surgeries, and then especially in the trans women kind of world, and then it culminates with the trans woman having sex with a man for the first time in a penetrative way, and while she's a woman, it's done. That's her story, and that's such a one. There's a lot of problematic stuff in there that that's what they think it means to be trans. And Alexa,
do you have something to share?
That's problematic. And two, it's really, for most people, transition is a very short period of a trans person's experiences. So it really focuses on a very small part. And I think people sometimes walk away thinking, oh, I get it. I know what it means, what it means for a person to be trans. And if that's all you're consuming, you probably don't.
Yeah. Well, and I think, my own experience, or what I can at least extract and maybe reflect back in my own experience, is when you have a baby, everybody cares about the pregnancy and the birth of the child, and then you kind of stop hearing from people.
Yeah.
You know,
Mhm.
it's like
Mhm.
the most interesting thing is my body. That 9 months with my kids, like, woo, you know, like I had a woman cup my breasts, literally cup them in her hands. I didn't know her at all. And she was like, oh, these are new. She'd seen me like twice on Instagram. You know, that was interesting to her. But have I heard from her in 4.5 years since my daughter was born? No. Um,
Mhm.
you know, so I think that it's something that we pick apart as like these hallmark moments of like certain, you know, aspects of living, and then it's like, you know, our attention spans are only so long, so we just focus in on the most like sexualized or, you know, sensational part of something, and then like the rest of it is not interesting, or, you know, like we don't appeal to it anymore. So I think that is really telling.
Yeah, and just think of the gap. So if you watch the documentary, and this documentary is like, this is what motherhood is, and it was from like gestation, conception to gestation, and then the birth, and then it just stopped. Like, do you really know what motherhood is at that point?
Right. And I think it's to some of what you shared, it's also very othering to you not it's also very othering not to reflect on the fact that me as a woman, I am constantly becoming, you know what I mean, like, and then to take your experience and not just point out you, but like any woman's experience and distill it into this like 20-minute gap is so reductive, right? Because like even my own journey with femininity, I used to dye my hair, I used to wear loads of makeup, I used to wear padded bras, you know, like all these things. And now it's like the less underwear, the better. I don't, you know, like I haven't dyed my hair in 2 years. And that to me now is being a woman. And that is, and 10 years from now, what it will mean for me to be a woman and claim my femininity will look so differently. So I think also hearing what you're saying is like giving you space to have your evolution as a woman forever. It's not just that tiny moment of your
Mhm.
life.
Yeah, and you can think about it like, so, you know, even listening to me, like if someone's listening to this and saying, oh, okay, well, this trans person has said what the experience is, like that's even a sliver too, because just think of like, how many books and articles are written by, you know, cis women about coming of age, or, you know, changes or these evolutions. Like obviously within the cis women, among cis women, there's a ton of variation, and there's just as much variation within, you know, the transgender community about how people kind of evolve, come to live in that identity and evolve and transition, and it can happen at so many points in someone's life. And, you know, even they can have so many different kind of relationships to what that means to be a woman or a man, or femininity or masculinity. So, you know, and it's, you just hear less variation because one, it's filtered by kind of a media. There's a certain story they like to kind of print, and then also there's a lot fewer trans people than cis women, right? I think trans population is like 0.6% of the population, somewhere around there. So you're just, if you don't go look for variation experience, it's very easy to hear the same thing or similar things a couple of times and think, okay, that's what it is, when it's really, it can be a lot more.
So I guess what I'm hearing too is just being more related with people. I think and I'm only an American, so I've never lived anywhere else, but I do think we are obsessed with um, averages and like not we have a hard time with nuance. I think the Black Lives Matter movement has exploded in people's faces in the best way possible, and I think a lot of that brings up people's difficulty with nuance. That, you know, yes, there are broad sweeping themes, but there's also nuance, and you have to be willing to have conversations and be in it more than just reading the headlines.
Mhm.
So one thing I'm hearing is just being related with people and like getting, you know, best thing I can do is get to know people instead of just making broad assumptions. Um, correct?
Yeah.
Maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thank you. I have taken away a lot of that, and you've shared a lot of really wonderful resources that I'm going to put in the comments of this podcast that I hope I am going to, I've watched one of them. I will go through all of them, but are there any resources that you would point, if anyone who is trans or maybe is in the, what would you say if someone hasn't fully like come out is not my favorite, but I guess I don't know another word for it. What would you say to someone who is maybe thinking of coming out, who's listening to this? Like maybe what is something you could give that's hopeful or helpful to them?
I mean, that's really contextual. I mean, I think, depending where you go for information, it can sometimes, I think, it can be built up as scarier than it is. Because, so I think, it's not necessarily going to be as hard as you think it is. There's a lot more resources out there, especially, youth have a lot more access to things now. And there's even, so in Indy, there's a place called Gender Nexus, which really, is a really supportive nonprofit that kind of has, I think they call it the pathfinding route, but a way to kind of explore gender identity. And there's the Indiana Youth Group for youth. So I think, there's ways to kind of ease into it. It's not necessarily jumping off a cliff. And I think that's easy to kind of get into that black and white thinking early on, because it can be so overwhelming. So you can do baby steps and kind of figure it out.
Thanks. What would you offer, if there are any, in addition to what I'm going to share in the comments, to cisgender people to do their homework? I mean, there are a lot of links that are going to be added here, but is there anything you'd like to say to cisgender people to consider beyond what we've already spoken to?
Say no. There is a book I really like. It's pretty dense and kind of written kind of in an academic fashion, but it's called Whipping Girl by Julia Serrano. And I feel like that, like if you really want to dive deep and kind of learn kind of more about the history of, the trans experience and the way, it's kind of been framed and things of that nature, that's a really good resource. That's one of my favorite books on the topic.
Cool. In addition to Shakti being a feminine energy, there is also the creative element. And you are a maker, a creative. So you shared a little bit at the beginning, but can you expand upon yourself as an artist, and what do you make?
Yeah, so I was going to say in the beginning, I worked with a variety of mediums, mostly textiles in wood, and I like to make functional objects that kind of have a sense of play or whimsy to them. So I do a lot of like bags with like crossbody bags and stuff that I think are in fun textures or designs, and the kind of woodworking projects of that nature. With COVID, I've recently got into needle felting, making just like these cute little felt animals, putting those together. And how I see that kind of relating to femininity in creation is, you can't, to create something, especially in like the way a maker would, or in any kind of artistic sense, you've got to express yourself. So that's obviously like being very expressive. Stuff is often kind of bundled in that idea of femininity. But for me also, there's this idea of vulnerability. Like you're kind of putting yourself out there, kind of letting go of your ego, and you're putting yourself out there in some kind of medium, and you're kind of showing it to the world and saying, here it is. And there's always a risk or fear of rejection. So, in my experience, that was something that I became very familiar with kind of in my transition, and it's carried over into that creative work. So I see that as kind of a feminine quality. There isn't like this macho kind of ego operating. It's much more of like sharing yourself and putting yourself out there.
I love that. And it speaks to the spectrum too, that gender as a construct is us, again, not being able to manage nuance, you know, that really some of the greatest artists in the world have been and are men. But to your point, I find creative elements to be, in order to be creative, which I would still consider myself a creative or an artist in many ways, you've got to soften, right? Like you've got to open up a hole and hope nobody stabs you in it. And I think that is feminine in nature. And I think anybody can wear that cape. You know what I mean? Like anybody can assume the heels that my son wants to wear, you know? And I think that's what is so empowering about this conversation, is that gender is a construct and we all can be on this, we all are, not even can be, we all are on the spectrum. And, you know, taking ourselves out of this like binary, like only women can be creative. Well, that's not true. Just like not all women have uteruses, and, you know, and on the other side of the coin. So I love that, because I have thought about, as I'm prepping for this week, my favorite artists, and most of them are men, but most of them have had to like shed their more masculine armor in order to create and put forth in the world what they've put forth. So I think that speaks beautifully to that.
Yeah, and I think you're touching on a really important point that I think is maybe not always made as salient in kind of the cisgendered community, and that's pulling apart. It's pulling apart the gender identity and like this idea of gender expression. Right? You know, the difference between gender identity and gender expression. So my gender identity is female, but my gender expression, you know, could be anything. I would probably say my gender expression is kind of like lazy femme. Like I like the feminine, but I'm also not going to put too much work into it, because I want to use my time to do other things.
Same.
So I don't do the full face, at least not anymore. And so I think that's a really important distinction. And in one of the links I've shared with you, there's even like a little worksheet. It's geared more towards youth, but like thinking like, you know, how does my gender identity is a spectrum, and, you know, gender expression can also be viewed as a spectrum. So what are the different ways those can line up, right? So, you know, a butch lesbian would identify as a woman, but gender expression is more masculine in those cases. So like there's all different combinations of that. So I think that sometimes we run the idea of being female together with that idea of femininity, but they really don't have to be. And I think when you start to parse those out and separate them, that starts to build like that kind of mental scaffolding, where all of a sudden there's like, oh, there's all these possibilities and these are all valid identities. And, you know, it kind of helps take some of those concepts out of that box. And I think that's one reason why femininity, at least in kind of our vernacular, is a really tricky word, because it has so many shades of meaning based on context and stuff. You know, at the surface level, you know, oftentimes it's used to be like delicate, pretty, passive, emotional, you know, or just something associated with women and girls. And that can be, you know, at that surface level, that can actually kind of be problematic, because it has this normative subtext of, to be a woman, you better have all these qualities. And it's actually, that's a little arbitrary, and it kind of uplifts the patriarchy, because a lot of that's defined by characteristics that men have decided are desirable. You know, so I think when you start to pull those apart, it's a lot easier to go deeper and say, and view femininity, like you were saying, where it's not linked to, you know, a biological set of characteristics or a gender identity, and it's something, you know, men can be feminine. There are these bundle of qualities that, you know, we've decided to label as feminine, that, you know, anyone can possess, and you can move between them, and they, you know, help you do different things and, you know, move through the world in different ways. So I thought, that makes a lot of sense. And then I think some of what you're talking about with Shakti, you know, there's also like the feminine sense, like kind of more in a divine sense. So separating that all out, I mean, it's part of that language. It gives us a lot more language to kind of talk about these ideas.
Yeah, I love that. And it reminds me too that, you know, I can see a lot of people like me, cisgender, heteronormative, white, able-bodied, like all the things right now are getting very uncomfortable because everything has been built and made for us, and in many terms by us, or, you know, are paid for by us, made by others. I think the best thing that, at least what I'm learning right now, is a lesson that yoga teaches over and over and over again, which is like, you gotta look inside first, because if I do my work and I recognize that, like, I identify as female, but I have a lot of masculine qualities, and I identify not my gender, but like my personality with those things, the more that I normalize that for myself, the better I'm going to be, as you're saying, for others, and saying like, oh yeah, cool, like, do you, because I'm clearly doing me all the time, you know, and analyzing and continuing to shine the reflective mirror back to ourselves, and being really honest in that conversation. You know, the race conversation is so important there, because what I've learned so deeply from Christina and from the books I'm reading is that I have to admit that I'm a racist before I can help anybody, you know, before I have to admit my conditioning and the things, before I can go back out into the world and do any sort of good. So thank you for sharing that. And that is something that I've taken to heart, is that, you know, it's this, put the leather over your feet instead of trying to cover the world with leather if you're going to try to help or do anything. So this conversation has been super powerful for me, so thank you. Is there anything in the realm of your Shakti as the divine feminine or the creative that you want to share? Where can we buy your stuff? Do you have an Etsy page right now? Or are you just doing it for the love of it?
No, not right now. I'm doing it more for just the fun of it, like, because I think that kind of not accountable to any customer or anything, like kind of creative freedom is really where I enjoy it the most.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Good for you. Well, Everly, thank you so much for your time and for your energy in this conversation. I am deeply grateful.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks.